As you know by now, the Trump White House has decided to put an end to the White House Correspondents Association monopoly on picking which outlets get to come into the president's pool. These are the outlets that get to come into special places like the Oval Office or on Air Force One or other press avails. By the way, you can cover the White House without even being in the White House. Lord knows I cover the White House all the time, and I'm not sitting in there. And by the way, I'll get to some more details about the White House Correspondents Association in a moment. Last night, the topic came up on CNN, Abby Phillips, a panel discussion, and Scott Jennings did what Scott Jennings does best.
Who is a longtime foreign correspondent. He covers the White House for the New York Times. He said, having served as a Moscow correspondent in the early days of Putin's reign, this reminds me of how the Kremlin took over its own press pool and made sure that only compliant journalists were given access.
Okay, can we just address this dictator business? I'm going to quote from some statistics put together. So our old friend Chris Cillizza, who calculated that in the first month of the Trump administration, the president took 1,009 questions. Hardly dictatorial behavior. Same stat for Joe Biden, 141. And I would remind you all that in 2023, the Biden administration revoked the hard passes of 442 journalists. And at the time, the White House Correspondents Association took, quote, a non-committal stance. So if you're worried about transparency, Trump is being far more transparent than any recent administration.
Why were their press passes revoked?
I don't know.
Was it because they didn't go to the White House frequently? Because
I don't know. They lost their access.
That happens in every
administration. They lost their access.
Besides,
So,
442 Biden people never called on James Rosen from Newsmax. And he's a real legitimate
but James
reporter.
Rosen
they never called on him.
Allowed in the White House.
Look at Abby Phillips running interference for the White House Correspondents Association. Great point about James Rosen at Newsmax, by the way. You know why James Rosen never got called on for 2 years? Because at a press briefing with Joe Biden, he cited a poll from that morning in Politico that said the majority of the American people, this is in 2022, the majority of the American people didn't think Joe Biden was cognitively capable of being president. And by asking that question, a very newsworthy question that reflected the majority of Americans' opinions about the president, because he asked that question, they refused to call him in again for 2 years. And what has Abby Phillips said? Well, at least he got to go into the room. Wow, what a champion of journalists that is. What a champion of the First Amendment that is. Well done, you, Abby Phillips. Yeah, Donald Trump has answered over 1,000 questions in his first month as president. Because, you know, there's one thing about Donald Trump that I think we can all agree on. He hates talking to reporters. He hates taking questions from reporters, this guy, right? He just likes to hide there, you know, in his little cave in the White House. He doesn't want any reporters coming in. That's certainly true of Donald Trump. The president of the White House Correspondents Association is Eugene Daniels from Politico. He put out a scathing letter about this. Let's read it together, shall we? This move tears at the independence of a free press in the United States. It suggests the government will choose the journalists who cover the president. In a free country, leaders must not be able to choose their own press corps. He's not choosing the press corps. He's choosing which reporters on a rotating basis get to come into the press pool to cover certain locations like the Oval Office around Air Force One. By the way, he's not excluding anyone. All they've done is open up and expand the press pool to outlets that had been excluded by whom? By the White House Correspondents Association. That's the irony here. He's including more reporters that had been left out by Eugene Daniels, the president of the White House Correspondents Association. The White House Correspondents Association was founded, I think, in 1920 or something. How on earth did we have a First Amendment and freedom of the press before the creation of the White House Correspondents Association? How on earth did any reporter or any newspaper cover the presidency before we had a White House Correspondents Association? It's also been a recent development. I mean, 50, 60 years maybe, but that's relatively recent when you've got a country that's 250 years old. It's been a recent development that the White House Correspondents Association has been responsible for the things that they are now stripped of responsibility for. And they have earned being stripped of that because they've lied to the American people during the Biden presidency. They said nothing when individuals were censored on social media over the COVID-19 lockdown and over the Hunter Biden laptop. What did the White House Correspondents Association say when the Biden administration censored the Hunter Biden laptop story. What did they say? Did they come to the defense of the truth of the New York Post reporters who covered the Hunter Biden laptop story? No, they didn't. They have earned the right to be removed from this equation. That said, let's go back to Eugene Daniels. For generations, the working journalists elected to lead the White House Correspondents Association board have consistently expanded the WHCA's membership and its pool rotations to facilitate the inclusion of new and emerging outlets. Really? Did you ever let Breitbart in? No, the answer is no. Breitbart News has been covering Washington, D.C. for 15 years. You know how I know that? Because I was there on day one. Andrew Breitbart hired me the first week of Big Hollywood, his very first website. I mean, I worked for free for a year, but it was worth it. Then he put me on the payroll. I was the 7th person on the payroll at Breitbart in the early days. We were working out of Andrew Breitbart's basement. And over the course of the last 15 years, Breitbart has been built into a juggernaut. And they never once were allowed into the White House press pool. White House Correspondents Association kept them out the entire time until now. Since its founding in 1914, the White House Correspondents Association has sought to ensure that the reporters, photographers, producers, and technicians who actually do the work 365 days of every year decide amongst themselves how these rotations are operated so as to ensure consistent professional standards and fairness in access on behalf of all readers, viewers, and listeners. Yeah, do you feel like you're getting fairness, accuracy, and professionalism in the output of these pools? Or do you think maybe they can do better? I think they can do better. To be clear, the White House did not give the WHCA board a heads up or have any discussions about today's announcements. Yeah, you know why? You know why you didn't get a heads up? Because you would have leaked it, you professional sons of guns. You would have leaked it because you have no professionalism and you have no standards. But the WHCA will never stop advocating for comprehensive access, full transparency, and the right of the American people to read, listen to, and watch reports from the White House delivered without fear or favor. That's Eugene Daniels, president of the White House Correspondents Association. In case you didn't know, that's Eugene Daniels right there. He may look familiar. He covered the Kamala Harris campaign on behalf of Politico while he was still the president of the White House Correspondents Association. There were rumors, I think very well-founded rumors, that should Kamala Harris have won the election, he would have been the press secretary for Kamala Harris. He was a very high-profile guy during that campaign. Wrote quite uncritically about Kamala Harris. Nice suit, by the way, pal. What are you doing, an endorsement for Pepto-Bismol? Oh, by the way, right after he put out that article, that letter, I should say, on behalf of the White House Correspondents Association, talking about their professionalism and their fairness and their unbiased reporting of the White House, he also then put out a personal note, as you see here from the Daily Caller. He's leaving Politico. What's his next gig? He's going to host a new show on weekends for MSNBC, because nothing says fairness, professionalism, and unbiased reporting like MSNBC. You can't make this stuff up. It's like they hand it to us on a gold platter, not a silver platter. This is a gold one, baby, because it's so obvious what they do. Let's swing it back over to CNN now. Here's Brian Stelter. Back at the time, he had the gig as the media editor for CNN. This is 2021, and the topic of conversation: should Fox News continue to be part of the White House press pool?
You know, these questions about Fox's, as Fox radicalizes and as it becomes even more and more of a political tool. Zerwick, you wrote a column recently for The Sun about this, saying Fox should be viewed as a political tool. And that raises a question: should it be a part of the White House press pool? You know, should it be afforded the privileges that come with news gathering? Even though they do have some news reporters at the White House, you're saying they're primarily a political tool. So should that be reassessed, Zerwick?
Listen, I really do. I think it's a discussion we need to have. Look, you're not supporting democracy. You're not supporting the larger values of this culture. They don't even stand up as a opposition party, but there's nothing journalistic in what Lachlan Murdoch said. And you know what? I say, hey, you know what? Let's take them at their word. Let's not let them on the plane. You want to let the Proud Boys on your plane, on Air Force One? No, I don't think so. These guys are doing the same thing.
There you go. Those people right there, I don't know about S.E. Cupp, but everybody else on that picture right there, proud members of the White House Correspondents Association, or at least the companies that they work for. See, these are guys on this media roundtable on CNN. Look at Brian Stelter. What a potato. openly discussing keeping Fox News from being able to cover the Biden presidency because they're radicalized and they're too political. So back then it was okay to have that conversation because you see, they were the gatekeepers. They ran the White House Correspondents Association, so they got to say who got into the room or not, who got to be part of the club or not. They're the gatekeepers. We live in a brand new world now, guys. We don't need you to be the gatekeepers anymore. And Scott Jennings, by the way, just scratched the surface on this last night. He had a stellar evening. I want to show you a couple more clips. Hey, is Abby Phillips? Is she doing the? She's doing the JD Vance look. Look at that. That's uncanny. Someone needs to clip that. Someone needs to put that right next to. I don't really care, Margaret. That's a beautiful look. Good for you, Abby. Little trying to cozy up to JD Vance. It's not going to work. All right, take a look.
It's hard to do.
I have an idea for them. Why don't they cut the $15 billion that Musk has received in federal funding? I mean, if
what would
he
you like
cares,
to cut specifically?
I would.
Him rescuing our astronauts, giving
It's not
internet
about
to Ukraine?
no.
Wait,
No. He's not rescuing our.
Hold on. So Elon's programs are fine, but everybody else's programs.
No, she
doesn't
said
matter
she
what
said
they
she
are,
wants to
just
cut
go
him out of the
ahead and
government. He does a lot of important things. I'm just asking
Yeah,
what you want to get rid of.
he is
We need a
basically-
space program, I think.
Wait,
We're not talking about a space program. I'm talking about how Elon Musk, the wealthiest person in the world, is in the federal government making decisions about grants and about funding whenever he benefits from those things. He has people in a number of government agencies. Yes, it is true, including the FBI, in order to find ways to gain grants and to make more money. And are you okay with that? Is that something you're okay with?
Well,
You're for cutting.
I think
You're for cutting, but you're not for cutting
A,
Musk.
I think you're full of it. B,
I'm not full of it. I have sources at the FBI.
he provides all sorts of services to the
Scott,
government.
just a second.
I do love that. I think you're full of it. Scott is so good. But let me. Can I just point out something? Because that 1 minute clip there actually points it out even best. The biggest problem with this show here is Abby Phillips. Did you notice? So here's Scott Jennings going toe to toe with the former spokesperson from the Democratic National Committee and a person aligned with Hillary Clinton. You would think that she was fully capable of being able to make her case and argue her point head to head across the table with Scott Jennings. But Abby Phillips can't shut her yap. She has to jump in there. She has to double team. She has to start fighting with Scott Jennings. She's supposed to be the moderator of this panel discussion, but she constantly cuts off Scott Jennings. She constantly teams up with the other people on the panel to go after him. That was a perfect smoking gun example of it. Just get out of the way, throw the topic out there. You brought these people to the panel to debate the issue. If this lady is not capable of towing the Democrat line, then don't bring her back. But why? She doesn't need your help, Abby. All right. A little bit more, though, actually. This was a different panel discussion on a different show. This is taking up the issue that it's been revealed that Elon Musk would be sitting in the cabinet room today during the first cabinet meeting. And everyone's going crazy about that, right? Which makes no sense because there's always, I'm sorry, last time I checked, Jill Biden, the wife of the president, was sitting during the Biden administration during cabinet meetings.
Did Joe Biden have staff at the White House? And how many of those staff members were elected?
Well, but Scott, Elon
zero.
Musk
The answer is zero. Every president appoints people to do things for them. To call him unelected is like the most naive and ridiculous talking point I've ever heard.
Scott, I can't believe you would believe something like this, because if this was Joe Biden allowing for a billionaire,
allowing people who weren't elected to run the country for the last 4 years, yeah, I would believe that actually.
Throwing another coup like January 6th.
I would believe it if Joe Biden had unelected people running the government for the last year, maybe the last 4 years. Yeah, I believe every word of it.
You wouldn't be up in arms, Scott.
I was up in arms about it.
I think there's a difference if it was George Soros. I think that the example is not, obviously everyone has unelected people in that they appoint. The difference is if it was George Soros.
George Soros does have influence over Democrats. He collects your people like Pokemon cards.
That's a great line. God, honestly, he collects your people like Pokemon cards. And again, a perfect example of the CNN host jumping in there and running interference, because look at it, it's already 2-on-1. You got two Democrats against Scott Jennings, but then the CNN host has to make it 3-on-1 because they're incapable of arguing the point. Of course, they're incapable of arguing the point because it's very hard to defend a lie. And that's exactly what the lie was. I mean, imagine if Joe Biden had a very rich person influencing the government. Scott Jennings is like, have you ever heard of George Soros? Have you? Maybe? perhaps, now and again. And Elon Musk is doing more than just putting money in here. He's actually doing the hard work that even Democrats concede needs to be done. They've been promising to do it for decades now. We're going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. You heard that a lot from Obama. You heard that from Biden. You heard that from Clinton. Now Elon Musk has been tasked to do it as a person who reports directly to the president and to the director of OMB, Russ Vought. He's actually doing it, and they're going nuts.